Hello again, everyone, and welcome to today's Disability and Jesus Sunday service for the last Sunday after Trinity. Yes, next week we'll be into another season. We'll be beginning All Saints and then moving towards the Sundays before Advent and Remembrance and Christ the King before we get into Advent at the end of November and the countdown toward Christmas really begins. But today we have this one more week in the ordinary time season when we're listening to some of Jesus' most important teachings week by week, and certainly today is no exception. So as we draw towards the autumn and the leaves are falling, and it's certainly becoming a little bit chillier, you can see I've got my jumper on today, then I hope today's service blesses you. I hope that you're able to relax into it and receive what God wants you to receive from this service today, in order that you may in turn let that flow through you and from you for the blessing of others. So we gather, as always, together apart to worship God and to rejoice in our fellowship with one another. You are very, very welcome here.
Time to come before God with honesty about the things thought and said and done that have not brought joy to God's heart. Come, let us return to the Lord and say, Lord our God, in our sin we have avoided your call. Our love for you is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes away early. Have mercy on us, deliver us from judgment, bind up our wounds and revive us. In Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Now receive these words of forgiveness. May God forgive us. May Christ befriend us. May the Spirit renew us and change our lives. Amen.
Let's pray. Merciful God, teach us to be faithful in change and uncertainty, that trusting in your word and obeying your will, we may be able to enter the unfailing joy of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
A reading from the Gospel of St. Mark, chapter 10, reading from verses 46 to 52. The healing of blind Bartimaeus. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still and said, Call him here. They called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, he's calling you. So, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The blind man said to him, My teacher, let me see again. Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Holy Word, Holy Wisdom.
I wonder if you ever think about what were the most important words spoken by Jesus in the Gospels. And there would be a huge number of candidates for that, of course, because almost everything Jesus said was important and was worth hearing. In fact, you could argue everything Jesus said was worth hearing, even if it was the first century Palestinian equivalent of, can I have a biscuit with my cup of tea? It would be worth hearing him say it. But there are some things which really make an impact that lasts and goes to the core of who we are. And I think today we have one of those. Let me begin by telling you a little story. I'm assured that the story's true, but it may not be. It may be what's often known as an anecdote that has questionable provenance, shall we say. But anyway, it concerns a gentleman who was in church one day, and this particular gentleman was not completely deaf, but certainly very hard of hearing, and was known to wear hearing aids and to have real trouble hearing people if they weren't speaking clearly, and was a good lip reader. So if people could, didn't cover their faces, he was able to pick up much more of what they were saying than if they were turned away from him or they had their face covered. So he was known in the congregation as somebody with hearing difficulties, let's say. And this one particular day, they had a prayer ministry going on in the church after the service. If anybody would like prayer for anything in particular, please come forward to the corner while everyone's having coffee, and we'll pray with you and for you. And so this particular week, this gentleman decided he would go forward for prayer. And he went forward, and the person who was offering him prayer said, "What do you want prayer for?" And he said, "My hearing." So without further ado, the person clapped their hands over his ears and started praying, "Lord, we pray for our dear brother, and we ask that you would restore his ears to full working order, that you would allow him to hear perfectly, that you would make it so he no longer needs hearing aids," and, all of that. And it went on for about 20 minutes. And after that, the guy said, who was praying, he said, "Well, is there any result for your hearing?" And the man who'd requested prayer said, "Well, I don't know, because it isn't until Thursday at the magistrate's court." So easy, isn't it? To assume, with visual clues, even with some verbal clues, what somebody might want prayer for. And again and again and again, it's the experience of disabled people that folks who want to pray for people, and particularly folks who want to pray for healing, we'll come to that word in a minute, but they almost make a beeline for somebody who has something that, in their eyes, obviously needs prayer. A friend of mine once was going up the street in Newcastle in her wheelchair and was descended upon by some people who were doing healing on the streets. And they immediately told her, not can we pray for you, but they were going to pray for her, and she was going to be healed, and she was going to get up out of her chair. And she gave them both barrels, saying that what she really needed healing for at the moment was a really bad time that she was going through, and she was actually on her way to counselling, and she was already late. So the best thing they could do for her would be to leave her alone and stop assuming. It happens all the time. It happens all the time. My friend Rachel talks about being at a big Christian conference and being frightened to go to the toilet in her wheelchair because on the way there she can barely get past the people who want to pray for her. And if she let every one of them stop her, then by the time she got to the toilet, it would be a new chair with a dry cushion that she would need. It's a constant. And if you want to read more about some experiences, and certainly more about what I'm talking about today, you could certainly do yourself a favour by getting the Grove booklet on worship and disability. It was written by Katie, our own Katie, and Anna Delange, a friend of mine. It's number 235 in the Grove Book series, if you'd like to order it online, or you can have a paper copy or a PDF. There's the plug. It's really seriously very good and very much worth reading. But they have this chapter in that book which is all about this. It's all about people praying for those who need healing. There's that word again. Healing is not just fixing. It's not just cure. And it's not something where, if I'm the person who wants to offer prayer, I can decide what it means. Not at all. It's much, much deeper than that. Let's go on a little bit into that. But first, let's come to those very important words that Jesus spoke in the Gospel, because it's in our Gospel reading today. The man Bartimaeus, who we're told is blind, is calling out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy upon me." And eventually Jesus hears him and says, "Come here, bring him here." And they get him over to Jesus, and Jesus says these incredibly important words. "What is it that you want me to do for you?" Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, who can probably tell instantly what it is that Bartimaeus wants prayer for, doesn't assume. He gives Bartimaeus his agency. He gives Bartimaeus the dignity of having a choice of what he wants prayer for. It might not have been anything to do with Bartimaeus' eyes, as it turns out it was, but it may have been that Bartimaeus was having a real difficulty with family members or friends. It may be that Bartimaeus had wanted healing for a great depression that he'd sunk into because of the way he was treated in those days. It may have been for all kinds of reasons. And so Jesus says to him, first off, "What is it that you would like me to do for you?" There's the really important lesson from the Gospel today. If we're going to offer anybody help of any kind, whether it's prayer or anything else, that's where we should begin too. What would you like me to do for you? How do you see me being able to help you? How can I offer you something that will be of value and be of use? Tell me where you're at right now and where my ministry might assist. Simple as that. It's absolutely as simple as that. And it's getting past those assumptions that if you're a wheelchair user, that what you must want is to be out of the chair. That if you're a user of crutches, what you must want is not to need them anymore. That if you're visually impaired, what you must want is 20/20 vision. That if you're hearing impaired, what you must want is hearing that's perfect. That if you have mental health difficulties, what you must want is just to be happy and content and okay and not anxious. There's a million different things that people can assume based on what they see of you. I mean, clearly you might see somebody wearing the football shirt of a different team from you, and you might think, well, they clearly need healing of this strange obsession to a different team. But if they see you wearing yours, they'd think the same back. It's too easy to make assumptions. It's too easy to think that we know best. And that's the point at which we get it wrong. The assumption, the thinking we know, and the thinking that there must be something in the other person that needs to be fixed. And here's where we come to that word, healing. What does it mean to be healed? Well, there's that other famous story, isn't there, from the Gospels of the paralysed man who was brought by his friends to Jesus, and when they got there, Jesus was inside a house, and there were so many people crammed inside and a great crowd outside that they couldn't get anywhere near the door. There's no way they could carry their friend into the middle of the house. And so they took him up the stairs on the side, which most houses had at the time, onto the flat roof, which again most houses had, and they broke a hole through the clay and the wood and the twigs and the straw and whatever else was used to make the roof. They broke a hole through that, and they lowered their friend down into the middle of the room where Jesus was, because they needed him to get to Jesus to receive what he needed. And what does Jesus do for him? Jesus says to him, "Your sins are forgiven." That's where Jesus was going to stop. Your sins are forgiven. Clearly what that man needed was to be at peace with God. There must have been something very deep troubling him. There must have been a sense in him that said his lot in life was something to do with how he'd lived, what he'd done, the choices he'd made. that he desperately needed to know that he was right with God, that he was okay. And so Jesus says to him, your sins are forgiven. Go in peace. And it's only after that, when the scribes and the lawyers and the Pharisees and the religious leaders and all the rest of it who happen to be there start to say, excuse me, your sins are forgiven. Who does he think he is? Forgiving sins. Only God can forgive sins. Who's this man if he thinks he can forgive sins? That's a job, a role, a gift for God alone. This is serious. And Jesus turns to them and kind of, in not so many words, says, you bet your bottom dollar it's serious. If you don't believe me, if you have so little faith that you need some kind of sign, some kind of proof that I am who I am, then okay, friend, who's now at peace with God, who's now got the healing he needed, okay, friend, let's show them. Stand up and walk. Carry your mat home. And so he stands up and walks. That cure of his condition wasn't his healing. It was possibly the beginning of the healing of some of the scribes and the Pharisees and the lawyers who needed to understand who Jesus was. And that guy was working with Jesus, the paralyzed man, working with Jesus to show them something that they really needed to understand. But our friend who had been paralyzed had already been healed when he was put right with God. He was cured for the benefit of others and their lack of understanding and their lack of faith. There is that huge difference between healing and cure. And our healing is about us being right with God and right with each other and right with ourselves. Our healing is God helping us to make real the great summary of the law. Love God with all that you are and love your neighbour as you love yourself. It's bringing us into right relationship with God, neighbour and self that enables us to love properly. That's healing. I've witnessed one or two dramatic and in some ways miraculous healings in my time. I've been doing this for so long. But the one that sticks in my mind is a gentleman when I was newly ordained, probably less than a year since I'd been ordained, and I was honorary chaplain with my training vicar to a hospice. And I went to visit the hospice this particular day, as I usually did. I think it was a Wednesday. And there was a gentleman in the ward, in the bed, and they told me he doesn't have long. He won't be here tomorrow. But he's troubled and he wants to talk to somebody. And I went to talk to him, and he unburdened himself of all sorts of things which to many people would have been quite trivial, some of them, but had been eating away at him for years and years and years. Things he'd said, thoughtless words, things he'd done that were selfish or hadn't done that he felt he should have. Nothing major, nothing that would have landed him in trouble, but they'd been eating away at him for years, for decades. And he unburdened himself. And we prayed. And I gave him some words of reassurance about forgiveness and about reconciliation with God and about peace with God and about how God sees him as a beloved child. And I blessed him. And after we'd spoken like that and prayed like that for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, he was visibly at peace. Not just in his words, not just when he said, I feel much better, but he was visibly at peace. And I left him and went to see somebody else. And as I was leaving, the nurse came and she said, he died about 10 minutes after you left him. But he died serenely, peacefully, and actually he died happy. Isn't that healing? There was no raising of the widow's son who died. There was no sudden, he's not going to die anymore, he's now fit and healthy. There's none of that, because that's just medical and physical. He died right with God, right with other people, and right with himself. There's healing. Bartimaeus in our gospel today sought a cure for his visual impairment. We don't know why, especially, that was the very thing that he felt he needed. But the point was, Jesus asked him what he wanted. Jesus worked with him. And he received what he needed at that moment to be at peace with God. And there's all sorts that comes from that about the whole question of why do some people get the healing they desire and others don't? And we've only got a short time. But for those of us who pray, Jesus' question has to be our question. What do you want me to do for you? How can I minister the love of God to you while offering you dignity and respect and agency and choice, valuing you as the person God made you to be, valuing you as I would Christ himself, because it's his image that's in you. That's how we should approach everybody in every situation, but it's certainly how we must approach people who are vulnerable because they have things going on and they need help to be at peace and to be right with God. Let our approach to each other always be the approach that Jesus took to Bartimaeus today. What is it that you would like me to do for you? And then let's love each other. Amen.
Our prayers of intercession today are using the words of the prayer of peace attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. Just read them through one at a time, and we'll pause at the end of each sentence and ponder what that means for us in our lives. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us bring love. Where there is offence, let us bring pardon. Where there is discord, let us bring union. Where there is error, let us bring truth. Where there is doubt, let us bring faith. Where there is despair, let us bring hope. Where there is darkness, let us bring your light. Where there is sadness, let us bring joy. Jesus, you have declared that your kingdom is among us. Open our lives to receive you. Strengthen our hands to serve you. Give courage to our hearts to love you and our neighbour and ourselves. Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen.